Yes, please.
Yes, brother.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Raziuddin. It's really a very pleasant opportunity, also a most pleasant responsibility to be introducing an important dimension of Professor Raziuddin Akhil's substantial and significant contributions, that of the role of the historian and of history in the public domain. Professor Akhil is one of our finest historians of medieval and early modern India today. That he also happens to be my distinguished colleague in the Department of History at Delhi University affords me the privilege of a few additional insights into the fine mind of this historian. Razi Akhil, as we call him, Razi's many books and writings reveal how tirelessly and conscientiously he has balanced serious academic interventions in our understanding of medieval Indian history. Be it his Sufism, culture and politics, or the Muslim question, or his edited volume, much feted edited volume with Partha Chatterjee, History in the Vernacular, and more than half a dozen other edited and authored books on the one hand, and on the other hand, a consistent effort to address a larger readership through his opinion pieces, commentaries, and short articles for newspapers, magazines, and blogs. His prolific writings reveal a deep sense of commitment to disciplinary sources and methods, a commitment that has not succumbed to the temptations or pressures of any specific political ideology or religious belief. Few people have worked on the sensitive subject of religion and political culture in medieval India with such commitment and integrity, or have researched and written about potentially volatile themes of conversion and Islamization with such apparent ease and clarity. His works have raised historical awareness by demolishing myths and offering correctives to help generate an informed public opinion in contemporary society. Unlike theoretical physics and abstract mathematics, where the line of control between experts and non-experts is so clearly demarcated, history writing is most devastatingly presumed to be everyone's cup of tea. In our troubled times, scientific research in history is often being sacrificed at the altar of popular memory, tailor-made to suit majoritarian political interests. Such a scenario necessitates that historians should emerge from their ivory towers and speak truth to power. The question is, how does a public intellectual respond to the prevailing socio-political situation? And how does a serious historian don the mantle of a public intellectual without essentializing a linear or reductive reading of history? In his forthcoming book that we are all very excited about, History in the Public Domain, Professor Raziuddin Akhil offers useful insights into such concerns, drawing from his own intense engagement with primary sources, while also bringing into discussion some of the core contributions of scholars like Shumit Sarkar, Muzaffar Alam, and Partha Chatterjee, among others. History in the Public Domain takes on a range of contemporary social, religious, and political concerns and approaches them lucidly yet methodically, highlighting diverse, pluralistic voices from our past, bringing them out of university classrooms and making in fact well-researched history amenable to discussions in cafeterias, roadside dhabas, and social hubs of various kinds. But more about this from the author himself. In his characteristic self-effacing and understated manner, Ek Sufi Tarika, inspired perhaps by his lifelong study of Sufism and Islam in Indian history. So over to the author. Thank you.
So now I invite Professor Apil Saab to please enlighten us with his lecture.
I must begin by thanking the organizers of this excellent program, especially Dr. Aziuddin Sahib, for patiently pursuing the completion of the essential nitty-gritty of today's event as part of this well-curated and now prestigious lecture series. Because of your name, some people think that I am also behind the show always. Some people contact me saying that how such a fine lecture series is being run by me. I said, no, it's not me. Dr. Aziuddin is based abroad and he is doing it. So there is certainly some interest in terms of the namesake. So thanks very much that you have asked me to speak here. And I'm deeply grateful to my distinguished colleague, Professor Parul Pandyadhar, for all the kind words and generous appreciation of my research and publications. I'm just trying to be sincere about what I'm doing in terms of commitment to research. But some tarif is good, especially in our cynical time when people are not generally kind to each other. And some people are unnecessarily angry. So this is a sad commentary on our time. Thanks are also due to Professor Farhat Nasreen, head of the Department of History and Culture in Jamia Millia Islamia, where I began my early training as a historian, in fact, as a postgraduate student in medieval Indian history in Jamia some 30 years back. And thanks to Professor Nasreen for agreeing at a short notice to be a part of this program, despite a busy schedule, and generally for all the support over the years. As just announced, I will be speaking today from my book, History in the Public Domain, which is being processed for publication by Manohar Publishers here in Delhi. Thanks to Mr. Ramesh Jain Sahib, who is one of the finest publisher in town. And my sincere namaste, adab, and salam to everyone present here. I will be speaking on some parts of the book, basically highlighting what are the key issues which concerns all of us as historians, as also all of us as conscientious, public, and disturbed about the manner in which some of the political developments are affecting us in different ways. So my forthcoming book, History in the Public Domain, is part of the attempt to highlight the importance of bringing history and historians out of university libraries and classrooms to face the public, and also disseminate current research. Our research doesn't get disseminated generally, and this is especially needed in the present context of so much misinformation and misrepresentation in newspapers, television, and YouTube channels, and more generally in social media, which are being stalked by people with violent intentions. Where there is need for us historians, intellectuals, academics to intervene for bringing about some sanity in the thinking of the people. The search for peace in violent political times takes us back to Indian history for some insights from political conquests, political theory, governing principles, and resolution of community relations in diverse societies, which have multiplicity of political idioms, religious idioms, respectfully coexisting with each other. The pluralistic form of society is historically marked by ethnic and religious multiplicity and respectful coexistence, with concerned scholars and thinkers speaking out for the rights of even those languishing at the bottom of a regressive social hierarchy and political marginalization, especially in aggressive majoritarian contexts. The medieval and early modern period of Indian history, which is my primary area of specialization in research and research matters, witnessed a broad inclusive framework of political ideas, theories and practices adopted by Mughal emperors like Akbar on the one hand, and rulers like Aurangzeb who drew on narrow sectarian ideologies, especially invoking the name of Sunni Islam for legitimizing some of the outrageous political aggrandizement, creating so much difficulties for subsequent generations of historians and other interested parties. Violence was possible in the wake of conquest and empire building, but medieval works on political theory advocated minimum use of force under all circumstances. Even Alauddin Khalji, issued a farman saying, life of the people should not be lost in large numbers in violent campaigns as well, because human resources are important. And to cite another well-known example, Abul Fazl's Akbarnama and Ayn Akbari articulated Mughal political ideology on how to govern a vast subcontinental country with so much diversity, especially for resolving the question of religious assertions through emphasis on broad-based governing principles conceptualized as peace with all, which we popularly know as Sulh Kul. This can also be glossed as politically rhetorical absolute peace, perfect peace. It was understood that political conquest might involve episodes of violence, but governing principles of the state had to be inclusive and just, offering space for all the heterogeneity to respectfully coexist. The examples of what medieval rulers did can serve as useful insights. Considerable political sagacity was displayed in handling people, traditions, customs, religions, languages, and diverse ways of living which have survived till modern times. And that's what we see in the subcontinent, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, taken together. Sri Lanka is in a bad state at present, unfortunately, but this is part of the larger whole. Caste or jati-based social stratification was not disturbed, and sections of assertive communities were continually incorporated in the political system. So there was space for all kinds of difference to politically coexist. Traditional and customary practices were dealt with in such a manner that the communities concerned did not feel threatened. Linguistic and ethnic pluralism were intelligently handled, evoking a strong faith in the protective umbrella of the state. With strong commitments to justice for all, rulers themselves acquired or were accorded divine-like characteristics, which are often identified as with the terms as Zillullah or Zille Subhani, which also meant combining the contradictory qualities of enjoying unlimited power, yet displaying amazing magnanimity and forgiveness to those seeking protection. So, Ya Jabbaro, Ya Paharo, and Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim can embody in the same person. Even though much violence, bloodshed, and destruction were possible during the conquest, once the opponents were defeated in the battlefield, the former rivals were co-opted and allowed to work as subordinate or trusted allies. This is what happened with the Rajputs in big way. Emphasis on protecting human resources and talents was recommended in works of political theory and also seen in practice. Places of worship too were protected, with only once caught in political struggles were targeted. Rulers who are reported to have demolished some places of worship and places of worship were demolished, of course, also gave generous grants for maintenance of religious establishments of the same communities who were seemingly affected by aggressive vandalism. No wonder some of the finest religious buildings have come down to us from medieval times. Intersecting political and cultural domains, Sufi Bhakti complex, Sufism and Bhakti traditions also preached peaceful coexistence and tolerance of other people's religious beliefs and practices, which further explains the amazing diversity we have inherited. In this context, we need to take cognizance of cases of belligerent sectarianism, complex identity formation, questions of conversion, and occasional attempts to abuse political power in the name of religion. Rulers do abuse religion, for their political aggrandizement. Unlike early modern Europe, where the emperors had realized that since they had the resources to conquer and build an empire, they had the power also to control and govern, which is what Michel Foucault has written in his lecture on governmentality, which is a very, very interesting lecture talking about early modern European emperors, trying to separate religion from politics by asserting their political supremacy and power. Unlike that, in India, we see that religion remains important, and rulers continue to seek religious legitimacy for political action, which meant the state could not be properly secularized, nor was religion made a private or personal matter of individuals. And that's why we see so much religious akhada going on always in our history. So as a result, the state continually abused religion for asserting its power, and in return, religion threatened the governing principles of the state. This tricky relation between politics and religion always needed a sane, balanced, and careful handling, ensuring governing principles were privileged over sectarian considerations. These have been continuously asserted by scholars like Akhil Bilgrami, Rajiv Bhargav, and others, who are arguing that the state has to be above politics, and religion can be the personal matter of the people. Thus, we need to know specific cases of religious justification of violence during battles for conquest and state building, also examine political principles and frameworks. And since, as I like to put it, the conquerors needed to come down from their horses and establish their rule, which was often not happening. And that would be a political failure. And understand continuous attempts at resolving religious and cultural tensions, therefore. This will help us move away from the usual binary, either in the scholarship, either celebrating or condemning political violence and bloodshed, as we also see, in continuously in current popular debate about what happened in the past. So, or completely denying the cases of violence, emphasizing instead the struggle for peace as actual example of peaceful community relations, which is the problem with our secular history and limitation of it. Predicament of secular history, as Professor Niladi Bhattacharya of JNU has said in one of his very, very interesting article. And yet we know that violence cannot be the order of the day, and which is the reason why we need states and governments, and yet those in the business of politics and power need to be regularly reminded of this important responsibility. History has for long taught us mass violence and genocide are to be banished for some sanity in society. Political madness of the violent kind can only be an aberration and not the norm. Not the norm. As we say, Tughlaq Farman, and the kind of madness, say Sultan Muhammad Tughlaq would have established for a period when he was going completely haywire. Political domain entails activism, propaganda, ideology, history, theory, as well as philosophy. At the bottom of the pit, engagement in third-rate politics takes the form of back-of-the-lane stabbings and confrontations, violence on the streets, where the boundary between crime and politics gets blurred. By contrast, in all civilized societies, scholars, writers, historians, political theorists, and philosophers have always been at the top of the social and political order. Whenever a history of a civilization is to be written, people will look at who were the scholars, in different fields and what were they doing. And if there were historians, what histories were being written at that time. Scholarly excellence demands that members of the academic community should aspire for the highest of the intellectual plane, maintaining graceful distance and accordingly treated with dignity. In our method and practice, we call it historical distance. Historical distance. In any civilizational history, therefore, as I said, scholars and intellectuals occupy a prominent position, since without their contributions, credible histories would not be possible. Though some political propagandists could offer a tunneled vision of dominant political ideologies, celebrating achievements of conquerors and rulers, which we often see in the public domain, in social media, Twitter, all kinds of nonsensical stuff is passed as historical, and serious historical research are sought to be marginalized and mocked. Certainly, in times of political instability, state and competent rulers are needed for ensuring political stability, managing community relations in societies with vast diversities, law and order, peace and tranquility, enforcement of a progressive law with the idea of justice for all, as law cannot be discriminatory, and general economic well-being of people, what could be termed as growth and development. Anarchy on the streets of the city is something certainly which that is abhorred by political theorists. Back in the 11th century, Imam Ghazali, who was a noted scholar, was stated the idea of one day of anarchy on the street of the city is going to be worse than 1,000 years of despotism by most wicked of the rulers, and therefore we need some despotism so that people are kept in check, which is another extreme, perhaps. So there are moments when governments and states fail to deliver, when third-rate theologians are privileged over first-class intellectuals. For the former can legitimize political abuse of religion, whereas critical, unbiased scholars would question violations and standard norms fearlessly. And on this point, there is a very interesting statement quoted by Chase Robinson in his very interesting book, Chase Robinson, on Islamic historiography, where he is mentioned in medieval Islam, theology was the first-class profession which attracted all the third-class people, whereas history was a second-class profession which attracted all first-class minds. We know medieval historiography, Arabic historiography was a very, very established field. So a first-class profession, because of legitimacy, religious legitimacy, was attracting all the wicked people. So they were becoming mullahs, and those who could think and critique and questions could become historians, and history was a second-class profession. Unfortunately, history perhaps remains a second-class profession because historians are still continuously showing, truth to those in power. And as historian and political theorist, Jauddin Barni of the 14th century was a personal advisor to Muhammad Tughlaq for 17 years. He was also a friend of Amir Khosrow and Amir Hassan Sizzi Dehlavi, and a disciple of Nizamuddin Aulia, wrote Tarikh-e-Feroz Shahi and Fatawai Jahandari, has written that historians and intellectuals should steer clear of any falsehood. At least in terms of while speaking about the past, falsehood and fudging of facts will be a most disturbing thing to do on the part of the historians. In India, as we know, we have thousands of years of civilizational achievements of excellence in different spheres of life, whether political, economic, social, and cultural. They provide us with the strength and confidence that divisive politics may push us towards the abyss at times, but sanity eventually prevails. Religious justification of violence takes a backseat to allow pragmatic governance and establish peace. The unity in diversity slogans such as Sarv Dham Sambhav or Mazhab Nahi Sikhata Aapas Mein Daya Rakhna highlight the value of peaceful coexistence. Cultural separatism and domination is set aside in favor of shared traditions and history. Common customs and practices lead us forward. Tolerance of difference and state maintaining equitable distance from sparring religious communities have frequently found favor in our past. Whatever the provocation and no matter who is in power, violence on the streets is condemnable as it defies the logic of the existence of the state itself. The state is there to take care of the protection of the people. Great empires and states have shown that inclusive politics is always better as it unites people for peaceful coexistence. They have recognized diversity and value of pluralism and the prosperity these ideas generated. On the other hand, aggressive and extremist political position divides and excludes people, supports an unjust order, and condones violence. Unleashing violent mobs on university campus, for instance, should certainly be an aberration and not the norm in a civilized society. Imagine a professor being arrested on the campus for criticizing the government. Despite all the limitations and challenges, identity politics, ideological struggles, and fear of violence, these are the major concerns that the scholars also feel on a daily basis, inside the campus or out. The parameters of historical research have expanded, and historians are arriving at some approximation of truth. Instead of insisting on an absolute truth, they are now recognizing the possibility of a space for difference of opinion and multiplicity of interpretations and perspectives. In all these, the conventional commitment to the protocols of historical research, method, and practice are upheld, especially with regard to the primacy of evidence, sources, and facts about which there is a consensus among historians about their validity and corroboration and acceptance, and asking a whole new set of questions and offering reasonable arguments in fine narratives. And therefore, some finest examples of this present research includes new histories of competitive religious practices, sophisticated political theories, questions of sovereignty, vibrant literary and historical traditions, fascinating visual cultures studied through art historical methods, consumption and trade, etc., as well as outstanding issues of regional, caste, gender, or linguistic identities. These are the fields on which some very interesting state-of-the-art research is happening today. Nations and nationalists are important in our difficult times, but regions are asserting, and their assertions are reflected in varied new regional histories. And thankfully, despite all the abuses heaped on it, some exhilarating research in recent years have established that medieval India too was not a dark age. Till some years back, a couple of years back, some of the finest historians would also agree that perhaps medieval India was a dark age. One right-wing historian said medieval India was a dark age because there was no electricity in medieval India. And there was no electricity in medieval India because medieval India did not have science. And it did not have science because Muslims were ruling. And Muslims believe in all religion and orthodoxy and fanaticism, etc., which was completely nonsensical. The enduring international image of India is of a peace-loving country with a long history celebrating the language of love and tolerance amongst its diverse population, comprising a variety of ethnic and religious linguistic communities with rich traditions of political and intellectual achievements going back to the dawn of human civilization. In India, we have at least 3,500 years of continuous history behind us, and it gives us a lot of hope, when such phases will come and go, those dark patches. The everlasting cry for the notion of brotherhood among Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and Christians at times sounds cliched, but it is always recognized as a socio-political ideal of unity in diversity. Religious appropriations and tensions apart, men of religion had long understood the need to control raw emotions of their followers so that they behave responsibly, recognizing religious difference with some degree of civility and a complete no to violence. This is what the Chishtis taught us. Moinuddin Chishti, Qutbuddin Bakhtiar Kaki, Baba Farid, Nizamuddin Aulia, and in subsequent generations, Sant Kabir and Guru Nanak, they were religious preceptors par excellence. Further, texts on political theory and norms of governance have historically emphasized, as I said, the need for a system disapproving discrimination in the name of religious difference or hierarchies based on birth and power for that matter, with a sincere commitment to justice for all. The 14th century Delhi Sultan Muhammad bin Tughlaq may have had his own specific rationality, but the arbitrary and often violent manner in which he seemingly conducted the business of the state led even his closest well-wishers and associates eventually to dump him, leaving such a forbidding image of his for posterity. And as we have long understood, it is easy to condemn or abandon someone like Aurangzeb for whatever irrational things he might have done. Also, intellectual freedom and excellence in a variety of fields, ranging from philosophical and otherworldly concerns to emotional and bodily practices, love and sex, cannot be suppressed forever. The society was certainly not so prudish and repressive in ancient times as it might appear from horrible dictates of village panchayats today. And this should certainly not be the ideal of a modern state promising good governance. In our more recent history, Gandhian politics epitomize the power of the weapon of truth and non-violence. The significance of effectiveness of this language of peaceful resistance in modern times have reinforced India's formidable image internationally, not only in Central Asia, Iran, Africa, and the Middle East, but also in the United States. The struggling people in Afghanistan, Palestine, and large parts of Africa have for long looked up to India to play an important role in helping resolve the problems facing them, problems not of their own making by any stretch of imagination. The trigger-happy, frustrated, and hawkish sections amongst Indians might be getting desperate, but the policymakers and others in the business of government can only act in a sensible manner. For it will be disastrous for India to abandon its historic role as a responsible nation, and there are enough safeguards and signals to ensure this will not be the case. Meanwhile, some people will continue to suffer. Desperate Rohingyas in Myanmar.
Akhil Saab, sorry to interrupt you. Don't look at your watch. You have plenty of time. Take it easy. Finish it
5
nicely.
minutes?
So no
Can
problem.
I complete in 5 minutes?
You have 15 minutes. आराम से बोलिए. No problem.
Okay, sure.
आराम से
Sure.
बोलिए.
Okay, so meanwhile, some people will continue to suffer. As I said, we know the condition of the Rohingyas in Myanmar. We also know of wretched Biharis in Bangladesh, hapless Hindu and Sikh minorities in Pakistan and Afghanistan at the hands of the Taliban, with the states utterly failing in ensuring justice for these innocent people, the miserable Palestinians in their own motherland, and those at the receiving end of ISIS bloodbath in the name of Islam, for which there is absolutely no justification. Majoritarianism anywhere is a dangerous thing. Minorities can have a space for themselves in a constitutional democracy and can survive temporary violence. But in regimes thriving in the name of religious or cultural nationalism, there are moments when the perpetrators can get away with serious human rights violations with long-term consequences. None of the above kind of difficulties is possible on Indian soil, mercifully, even though, from time to time we get disturbed about things happening in some pockets. For those in power have to necessarily adhere to the principles of a firmly grounded Indian state, which are above the narrow and partisan interests of political parties and vote banks. So there is a state and there is a government, and there are political parties, and there are interested, parties further down. Thus, pragmatics of running a state requires a ruler and polity that provide justice, some kind of reasonable state laws and policies, and welfare of the poor, as well as space for critical intellectual pursuits. Temporary setbacks notwithstanding, the checkered history of India's civilizational achievements cannot be undone by narrowly conceived political ideologies which can dominate only in short and dark patches. In what I have said above, and for my work generally, and in this book, certainly I am, drawing upon the fine work of a large number of scholars working in related fields. In the book, I have written commentaries, long commentaries on some of the fine works of, of coming up with very interesting new research, which also which also seek to intervene actually in current debate about matters politics. So in conclusion, for insights and inspiration in thinking about my own work, I'm thankful to a number of senior scholars in social sciences and humanities. In particular, I have learned directly from the works of and in many different ways, scholars like Professor Muzaffar Alam, who was my supervisor in JNU, who has just come up with a book on the Mughals, and the tradition of tolerance, etc. Very important work of political theory by Rajiv Bhargav. David Curley's work on the Mangal Kavyas of the 16th, 17th century. In fact, the earliest reference to this assertion that we get to hear about of him in terms of this phrase, Mia Bibi Razi, to kya karega Qazi, is to be found in the Mangal Kavyas, Bengali Mangal Kavya, where it is written in Bangla that Mia Bibi Raji ki korbe kaji. So this kind of material is used, Mangal Kavya, by a scholar like David Curley, part which is fine work on political theory and history, Supriya Chaudhry's work on 18th century English literature. I'm also, banking on support of my senior colleague in Delhi University, Professor Amar Farooqi, Narayani Gupta, who is a fine historian in Delhi, Delhi's finest historian in the 18th, 19th century, was a historian in Jamia. Jack Hawley was there in Columbia. His work on Bhakti is very important. Werner Minsky was a law professor. Harbans Mukhia's work on medieval India and generally his interventions is one of the doyens of among historians in Delhi. Also, in more recent times, very dynamic kind of interventions by scholars like Mahesh Rangarajan and Mukul Keswan, to name just a few fine scholars. They have shown the way with their excellence in rigorous research and necessary intervention in public when needed. There are moments in our history when scholars and intellectuals need to stick their neck out, calling a spade, for it is in the interest of our society and country that truth must prevail. This emphasis on returning to the facts of the matter is particularly urgent in the current post-truth era, which is creating so much ill will and hatred around us. As professional historians and academics and scholars generally, our work also calls for the much needed peace in society. I am stopping here to allow for sufficient time for the remainder of the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Akhil sir. You had time, but if you have finished it and concluded as per you wanted, that's fine. So let's hear a concluding remark from Professor Farhat Nasreen, and after that we'll come to question and answer session. Thank you very much. Now I invite Professor Farhat Nasreen for the concluding remark.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Razi Saab, for this opportunity to give me the honor of presenting some concluding remarks on Razi's talk. Very mesmerizing, Razi, as expected. So what Razi has done today is that he's drawn our attention to the importance of history as a subject and also historians as people who have to be responsible, because the responsibility that the historians have is to keep a record of the passage of time. So as keepers of a record of the passage of time, you have to be truthful. You have to be absolutely truthful with what you record and what you present to the people. It is almost as if it's like an heirloom that you have. It's a piece of jewelry that you have. And if any part of that jewelry from there, then the heirloom is a loss. So the history of people is also like a beautiful piece of jewelry. And as keepers of time and historians, it's very important that we have to keep every piece in that jewelry absolutely intact. And it'll take a lot. It's not going to be easy. That's one thing that you spoke of, which was very, very interesting. The other thing that you said that, you know, that there is actually pretty much a mess around us, because there is a lot of imagined history, things that, you know, which will fall in the category of, you know, could have been, should have been, may have been, and so on and so forth. So to bring out the truth from that kind of you know, layers of guesswork and imagination, and to put it out there and to have the facts to stand by the truth that you are saying, that again is very, very important. As far as the audience or the readers are concerned, it's important for the audience to understand the mind of the historian, because the historian is also like a seller, you see. To understand what is he selling, and you have to buy carefully. So that is again a very important thing that Razi pointed out. You started off, you spoke about Sulekul very early on when you started off this talk. And that is one of the basic fundamental things that the world requires. Because if you think that in a society or in a social system, if you put people at the two ends, whether it is, you know, whether it's identity politics, or whether it is a class differentiation, or whether it's a social differentiation, if you think that you're going to stretch people into a straight line and you are at one end of it and the other party is at the other end of it, then it's not like that, because the world is round. So you tend to meet somehow. And if you have friction at that meeting point, then everyone is in trouble. So therefore, Sulekul is the mantra that I think the world requires as of now. And then the importance of history, not just you have to narrate a story, but to use it like a tool to bring peace to the world, to make people understand really who they are, what life has been about for generations that have gone by, and what can you expect for the generations that are going to come, because a lot of sequences which are there in history, they tend to repeat themselves somehow. The characters might change, but there is a sequence of repetition. So, you know, if there's evil around, then there's going to be trouble. So therefore, it was a very, very comprehensive talk that reminded us of a lot of responsibility as historians, a lot of responsibility as readers and as people. So thank you so much. And I think we need to remember all the while that wherever in the world you are, whichever religion you belong to, whichever race, every time that you cut a human body, the blood is going to be red. That is absolutely proven. So we have to hold on to that and keep doing our bit. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Well, it was quite brief, but anyway, so nice for the concluding talk. And now we have heard all three. It was wonderful. So we will now move on to question and answer session. But before that, let me have an announcement with another slide for the upcoming Saturday as we do. Haris, can you show this slide, please? For next slide, Haris.
Okay, is it visible?
Yes. Thank you. Danish Iqbal is our monthly host who was missing, and people were really missing him a lot. He is presently in Germany and France, touring to various institutions. He will be back next week. He is presenting a very unique dastan. He was missing. Mohne ki Mohni dastan. It is a total different subject line from history and politics and activism. Nonetheless, it also plays a wonderful role in our life, how we hear different stories of passion and introspection. So let's move on to our question answer session. Take it up, Haris.
Whatever, should I read them out
Yes.
one by one? So,
No, that's fine. Today our moderator, Dr. Rafat Hussain, is not present, neither Faisal. So I have to take this responsibility, which I rarely do. So the way to ask question is, as some of you have raised digital hands, or if you cannot manage to raise digital hand, you can raise your hand, and it will be on my discretion to ask one by one. And please be very brief in asking questions, no commentaries, and also the speakers who respond also should be very brief. So the first question comes from Professor Muqtadar Khan, Professor of History from University of Delaware. Muqtadar sir.
Assalamu alaikum to all of you, and good morning, and thank you very much for this excellent presentation. Aqil Saab, I'm a big fan of you. I'm reading your books. Do you have my book? If not, I will send you one. I think the most important question remain untouched, that with the rise of Hindu nationalism, Indian history has also become a battleground. Which obviously you have addressed in several of your books. And so it becomes very critical about how history is presented. And in this day of narratives, this assumption that there is an objective history probably is a fallacious conclusion. But nevertheless, there is a battle going on about how to represent the past in order to construct a new India. So essentially, we find Muslims in a very awkward position, which is that we have to defend the history of Islam in India. And so we have to consistently deal with people like Aurangzeb and their activities. So my question to you is it possible for Indian Muslims who are constantly critical of see, there are three histories going on. One is this revisionist Hindutva historicism of Muslim past in India. And then the so-called secular and leftist, that's what they call a secular leftist defense of the Mughals, so beautifully articulated in the manifestation of Audrey Trushki's book on Aurangzeb. But there is also the Indian Muslim narrative of history, what Indian Muslims actually believe about the past. And I think unless that is changed, the Muslim demand that Hindus become democratic, secular, and pluralism, while Muslims remain attached and stuck to their Muslim personal law and cheerleading of Taliban and other groups in the world which advocate Sharia, is not going to mitigate this battle of history, because ultimately what Hindutva seeks to do is to erase Islam from the past and Muslims from the present, at least make them invisible. That is the goal, I think, of Hindutva. And so this history writing becomes very critical. To give you one example of this Suleh Kul idea.
Muqtadar sir, thoda sa brief ho jaye, please be brief.
30 seconds and I'm done. 30 seconds.
Yeah, we cannot take that much time.
Sure.
Sorry.
So if you take the idea of Suleh Kul, and yes, it was a great idea, but if you tested it and you saw the Mughals went to war practically every day and even on the weekends. So where was the Suleh Kul? Aurangzeb was trying to conquer the whole of this. So yes, it was a great idea articulated once, but even Akbar himself was often at war. So how do we make this credible claim that Muslim past was tolerant and inclusive?
These are These are very, very important concerns, and I agree with much of what you have said. As historians, it is our responsibility to go by the evidence. Now, if the evidence doesn't permit an absolute truth of the kind people talk about with reference to Suletul, we certainly begin to question that the kind of image, etc., that has been built around or ideology, Akbari ideology, which does not give a space to Abdul Qadir Budayuni kinds of position in his Muntakhabut Tawarikh. So Akbar Nama and Akbari will build that big, huge image of Akbar as tolerant, etc. Which is our staple thing to go to. But if we look at Badayuni's Muntakhabut Tawarikh, we see there are serious difficulties within the Muslim domain as well. And then when we look at Aurangzeb's reign, certainly it becomes more complicated. Muzaffar Alam wrote his. I'm sure you have seen his new book, where So there are certainly difficulties, of the kind that we have to recognize. A very, very complicated kind. Yes. So a very, very complicated kind of history that we have and historical processes. And it is important that as historians and scholars, we do not, go about sanitizing that in the light of our, particular ideology that we might be adhering to. And that's why it is important that the primacy of evidence are emphasized rather than a priori, commitment to particular ideologies. So whether it is secularism of the kind that we are often, asked to follow as perhaps liberating, virtuous, or very, very aggressive kind of Hindutva politics, certainly there will be a few sensible support to that. But you are right about the problems in terms of poverty of thinking about things rationally. And someone like Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna in the 11th century, or Aurangzeb in the 17th century, are Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna Rahmatullah Alayh as Aurangzeb Rahmatullah Alayh are part of the pantheon of the Sufis, the religious figures. So Moinuddin Chishti, Raja Gharib Nawaz Moinuddin Chishti Rahmatullah Alayh, and then before him is immediately before him is actually Sultan Mahmud of Ghazna in the 11th century, and along with Nizamuddin Awliya and Shah Waliullah, Sheikh Musarandi, we have Aurangzeb Rahmatullah Alayh, which is completely nonsensical. And we know that this Hindu-Muslim business has a long history, and we have to recognize that. And we also know that, not blaming it on Pakistan, but we know that 1947 is a time when certainly lots of things also happened. One of our finest historian, Ayaz Qureshi, when he was in Delhi, perhaps he would be writing at a different register compared to the violence of partition that he had to endure. And then when he goes over to Pakistan, the kind of history he writes in terms of a separate history for Hindus and Muslims, going back to the time of Muhammad bin Qasim's conquest of Sindh early in the 8th century, and say Hindus and Muslims have been two different civilizations and nations, according to him, and with separate history going back 8th century Sindh, which is certainly historical for someone, a good historian like him, would be making that kind of assertion. And then he would be condemning Kabir and Akbar in his book, Muslim community of the Indo-Pak subcontinent, or ulama in politics, that Kabir and figures like Kabir and Akbar were agents of Hinduism, and they wanted to do away with Islam. And then the example from Badayuni would be given to show that certainly there was something wrong in terms of a very, very direct assault on Sunni Islam. So we also have, as referring to in the lecture, as in the book, and continuously, that sectarianism, within Islam is another. So as historians, certainly in terms of objectivity, what we are expected to do is to speak and write in a manner that is credible. And some credibility in our writing of history is possible when we do not sell out to particular ideology or some vested political interests. And we know that there are enough sources available which present a very, very complicated kind of picture of the kind of things which have happened in our past, rather than adhering to a particular ideology and then presenting that ideological material, which is basically propaganda material, to argue for a case. So I agree with your concern, and it is concern of some of the best historians all the time as to very sanitized kind of secular history will not help beyond a point, because we know community relations are very complicated. We look at the Sufi Bhakti field. I was praising that, but we also know the kind of tensions which have gone into the making of the sampradayas and panth and the communities associated with Sufism and Bhakti. Do not want to name particular communities, but we know that the kind of manner in which followers of different gurus and babas and Sufis have resorted to, for political gains in terms of very narrow boundary markers, and they would be excluding people, and violence will be resorted to defeating the original teachings of the gurus themselves, and the sons themselves. What happened at the death of Kabir, or what happened at the death of Guru Nanak? Even if those stories are legendary, but we know that those history of those legends have continued for 300 years. And therefore, you're right that sanitized kind of history or very aggressive kind of Hindutva politics or propaganda in terms of the writing of history. I was referring to that episode about that statement about medieval India as a dark age because there was no electricity in medieval India. This is K.S. Lal. K.S. Lal was a good historian otherwise. He was a historian of the Khaljis, and then historians of the Afghans, and the kind of nonsensical things eventually he writes when he has sold out to Vishwa Hindu Parishad subsequently post-retirement. So now, does it mean that political involvement of historians lead to this kind of situation, that they can come up with such absurd propositions that they cannot maintain some kind of objectivity, as I like to put it, which is about credibility, that historians cannot be credible? And they can be, because our historical method gives us enough tools to handle in terms of as I said, sources and evidence and facts and discussions among historians about the reliability of the material that we are using for saying something that we are saying. So beyond that, certainly is a propaganda, political propaganda, in which history is abused, and history is abused by people who are completely illiterate. But if history is abused by people who are otherwise trained as historians, or Ayush Qureshi in the 1940s, 50s, or K.S. Lal, or our secular historians, I do not want to name them because they are otherwise very respectable and they have very wide following. But we know that this is a difficulty within academia also, that our scholarship is not, able to protect itself from political pressures, that historians are sometimes making such statements and passing those statements as historical research, which is not the case. So your concerns are.
जी अब्दुल साहब, और क्वेश्चंस भी होंगे तो आप सेव कीजिए, और भी लोगों से बहुत बातें करनी होंगी आपको. So my next person to ask is Rudrakshu Singh, an attorney from Madhya Pradesh somewhere. Yeah, please, Rudrakshu, be brief.
Sir, I am an attorney in Rajasthan, not Madhya Pradesh.
All right.
My question would be, sir, that to any of the three panelists who want to pick it up, that Taj Mahal used to be a temple. Where has this theory come from? Does this theory carry any historicity, or is it complete nonsense?
No, I will say that all kinds of, not only Taj Mahal, but all kinds of sites are being claimed as sites which were previously, Hindu places of worship, which were occupied by Muslim rulers and transformed and, made their own. So this is not only about Taj Mahal, but there are all different sites, and they're claiming when Qutub Minar as a site that needed to be reclaimed. Some people also talk about Jama Masjid in Delhi. So after a point, what becomes more important for them is not so much as evidence regarding what the sites were like previously. But what these people want today, and they want basically those sites to be captured and sort of reclaimed for their purpose. This will lead to all kinds of difficulties, which I think is both against the law and against any sensible kind of thinking that we are supposed to be thinking about in the interest of the nation, society, etc. So for them, it is not so much about evidence that whether it was a temple or whether it was what. They just want that place to be captured and complete disregard to whatever is the practice for 300 years or 400 years at different places.
GG.
It's not one
next
side. It is not one side. So many, there's so many sites have been listed, and they want those sites to be captured and revenged. So this
And
is
sir,
not a way-
sir, it is often said that Shah Jahan ordered the cutting of limbs of those who constructed the Taj Mahal.
That's
What
not
is-
true. That's not true. I don't think that can be. That is
Okay.
not true.
Next person to ask is Ms. Amna Latif. Please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Awesome.
So it's good to catch you here at this platform. So my question is very simple. Actually, I got reply. You already replied what I was in my mind. So I just want to know that what you mean by the objectivity of history. I mean, sir, I am in my second year of PhD research. So it's very important for me to know that how a historian could be, unbiased, or when you talk about power and knowledge access, and then you talk about new historicism where literature is produced in reaction of the social change. So how can you be, unbiased? Number one, and what you mean by objectivity of the history? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good to see you here. And objectivity in history is about credibility in what the historians write about the past, and they do that with reference to the sources relating to the past. Such sources which are considered amongst historians as reliable for whatever interpretations can be drawn from the material in those sources. So there is a whole protocol about how a particular set of sources are identified. Those sources are recognized by the general fraternity of the historian as reliable for using them for the writing of history. Then we get into inside, the internal evidence within those sources to look for such information which is reliable. Those information can then be verified and corroborated with reference to other set of sources. Their authenticity and validity recognized by the historian herself, as also the fraternity of the historians. Eventually, on the basis of that material, the narrative that the historian would be producing should be written in a language that is certainly literary, and that is certainly a fine literary narrative. And in doing so, some degree of biases and prejudices and etc. are possible. After all, historians are using the language that they are supposed to be using. They have their likes and dislikes. They could also have some degree of political inclinations in favor of or against particular positions. But eventually what historians produce, if there is credibility in what historians are producing, there will be takers for those positions, and therefore there will be respect for that position. If historians are openly declaring themselves as Hindutva or fundamentalists or Muslim or Islamists or even leftists, Marxists, secularists, etc., then certainly their commitment to those ideologies become more important, and therefore the problem of objectivity certainly is there. So historians' commitment to particular ideologies of their time is incompatible for the writing of history in terms of objectivity. But if a historian is particularly committed to, deeply committed to his or her sources, the credibility that the historian can enjoy, and command, respect, is what is meant when we say objectivity. Certainly, we are not doing natural sciences kind of, lab, experiments, but we are part of the society in which we live, and the boundary between the society and the academic institutions are porous. All of us are part of the society in which we are living, and we are also doing historical research. We should be in a position to cut out all the nonsense of the society in such a way that the pressures the political kind, ideological kinds are not determining what I'm thinking and talking about as a historian, then certainly what I'm saying is credible for you. If you trust in what I'm saying, then I'm objective historian, reliable historian, credible historian. Otherwise, you can easily dismiss me as someone speaking for a particular position and not so much as a distinguished historian. So credibility is objectivity.
I think Professor Farhat Nasreen Saba also wanted to make some comment on either previous question or the current question. Hello, Professor.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Raziuddin Saab. Well, the first thing that I just wanted to very quickly say to Professor Muqtadar Saab, that certainly there is a need to tell the Muslims that the Mughal rulers or the rulers of the Sultanate are not the representatives of Islam. They are Muslims, but they don't represent Islam. So they don't need to be heroes for the Muslims. That is very clear, and that I think we need to put out there. And if the Muslim historians themselves put it out there, that's going to be far more effective than anyone else saying that. So we have to say that clearly. The other thing that you spoke about, Sulh Kul. The idea of Sulh Kul was about, having a common goal. It is not about not fighting with other people, but having a common goal. So Akbar was trying to have a common goal for the people who are working for him. So a common goal for the nobility, which was going to ensure that the empire flourishes. So if we take that kind of a view and we say that, well, let's have a common goal for the humanity, that the humanity flourishes. So then the Sulh Kul comes in as an idea. And we, for establishing that kind of a peace, even if we have to fight off some of the people amongst ourselves who don't agree with this idea of peace, then there is a war. So that is the thing. That's the idea of Sulh Kul. Then to this person called, and so the idea of selecting information, see, historians are like advocates. So if you tell us कि औरंगजेब के खिलाफ मुकदमा लड़ना है, you have to fight against औरंगजेब, we can do that. If you say that you have to defend औरंगजेब, we can do that also, because we have facts for everything. So sometimes we have to just choose that which is the better argument to take, and what will be the outcome which is going to be the best for the society and the world, and then we argue the case accordingly, because actually we can argue from both sides. As far as this Rudranshu's question is concerned, the land on which the Taj Mahal is made it belonged to Jai Singh, to one of the Rajput Rajas. He had that land because he was going to build probably a palace for himself there. But because Shah Jahan wanted to recreate the place where originally Mumtaz Mahal was buried, so that piece of land was bought from Shah Jahan and from Jai Singh. So that is why maybe this whole idea has come up, that there's a little bit of a confusion about how this land came to the Mughals and so on. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for this opportunity.
Wonderful, wonderful. So at this stage, I will call some senior scholars here who have not raised their hand, and in particular, Dr. Mozam Siddiqui and then Dr. Nazir Ahmed. Mozam sir. Dr. Mozam Siddiqui sir. If you're not here, then I'm asking Nazir Ahmed Saab to, Dr. Mozam Saab, please.
Actually, I'm here.
Yes, so make a brief comment or a question.
Very, very simple question. And just as far as the near future is concerned, so Professor Akhil, what is your feeling about, as being a historian, and you probably can feel the pulse of the time and what's going to happen in the near future, and so if you can shed some light on that. Thank you.
I don't think we need to worry much beyond a point, because as I said, for any parts of the world we are living in, we have long historical experience of sometimes political anarchy and instability, some very, very rock kind of behavior on the part of people in power. But eventually law and constitutions and whatever law, ancient laws, medieval laws, modern constitutions ensure that there is a limit to any kind of political madness that creates problems in society. Eventually, whenever there is difficulty, after a point, there will be need for a discussion for peaceful coexistence, respectful coexistence of all different kinds of people. For the subcontinent also, we know that obviously there are phases when there are for 50 years or 100 years, there is political stability, economic prosperity, peace in society. And then there will be phases when there are political disintegration and economic mess, and therefore, there are problems in society as well. In subcontinent, we have something like 176 crore people, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India taken together. And these people cannot be fighting all the time. They cannot be, at each other's throats all the time. So future, there is no concern with regard to the future. If at all there is a concern, there is concern with regard to whatever is happening in the present, and that needs to be corrected. And that can be corrected through sensible interventions, on the part of the intellectuals, scholars, sensible people in politics, public intellectuals, etc. Also, with regard to historians, just add to what Professor Naseem was previously saying, not so much as advocates, but as judges, in terms of looking at evidence with regard to whatever has happened or happening, and judges have to act responsibly. Similarly, historians look at evidence as judges in such a way that they could be arriving at positions which are credible positions, acceptable positions, supported by evidence and facts, etc. And therefore, beyond a point, we don't need to worry, except that we have to support positions which are rational, which are responsible, and we have a long history of this kind of interventions in our society. That's what I was mentioning in my lecture also, that for 3,500 years we have people asserting themselves and showing truth to power, commenting on what is just rule, forms of governance which are inclusive, etc. Society cannot be fighting, and people cannot be fighting all the time, in the name of religion or sex and sampradaya and fun, etc. In India today, everything is being reduced to Hindu-Muslim, but even Hindus and Muslims understand that this is a political ploy that cannot be used for with all of them forever. It has to, at some stage, it has to stop. And also, as I said, law and judges and we have our institutions which will see us through. There is, certainly we need to be guarding in terms of what is the responsibility on the part of sensible people, and how even those in power know what there's a limit to their madness. You are in the US, we know what happened in the US. Trump came up with all kinds of things, and eventually very responsibly American public removed him, and there is some sanity certainly there compared to the kind of volatile situation that was created by the Trump regime. So similarly, in other places also, there can be a mess and there will be reconstruction. We look at the condition in Sri Lanka today, and we know that things have to change. If leadership is not responsible, public will come out and take control of things in favor of sanity.
Thank you.
Dr. Nazir Ahmed.
Ji, Assalamu
Please.
alaikum. A very illuminating lecture. I'd like to take a different tack. It was a very interesting title we had for the seminar, namely Lovers of God and Sufism. The real history of humankind is the spiritual history, how humankind has gone from station to station and either made progress or regressed in its transformation to where we are at the present time. The history of India in the medieval period was but a reflection of the larger history of what was going on in the rest of the world, specifically in the Islamic world. So from after the Mongol invasions until about the time of Aurangzeb, I would call it the age of Taqwa. History moves in broad strokes and hinges. So is it correct to look at the period of Aurangzeb, specifically the decade of the 1680s, as a hinge in the historical, spiritual development of India, where India was transformed from an age of spirituality to the age of legality, which ultimately led to its downfall? What is your opinion, sir?
This is an important concern, and I was as I was referring to in response to the early set of questions. Professor Muzaffar Alam's new work has addressed this question: Mughals and Sufis. The thing is that the Naqshbandis were also claiming to be doing mysticism and spirituality and Sufism. And Naqshbandis got very well entrenched in the Mughal system, especially by the middle of the 17th century. By Aurangzeb's heyday of Aurangzeb's power, 1660s, 70s, 80s. All the violence that Aurangzeb unleashed for capturing power was justified by Naqshbandi Sufis, Sheikh Ahmad Sarandi's sons and son especially, and grandsons. So some degree of spirituality certainly they were also showing in terms of the Naqshbandi tradition, not so much and very different from the Chishtis and the Qadri positions. And certainly you are right about certain degree of legality in terms of particular interpretation of the Sunni Hanafi Islam of the kind that that Aurangzeb sought to be using for legitimizing all the violations that he was introducing in terms of the justification of his politics. So a stark difference between spirituality and legality here perhaps will not work, because Naqshbandis, after all, they are also doing Sufism, and so in fact there is this reference to Roshan Ara in continuous conversation with through letters with one of the grandsons of Aurangzeb, Khaja Saifuddin, who was operating from the Mughal court and access to Mughal harem, and was continuously talking about how Roshan Ara is transforming herself in spirituality through a conversation and some chanting of zikr, not so much loud zikr of the Chishti type, but certainly silent meditation that would be referred to as zikr-e-dil. So therefore, the unfortunate part is certainly the abuse of religion of the kind that we have seen from time to time in the Mughal system, and the kind of invocation to religion and especially Islam they made, and sometimes they brought a bad name for religion and Islam in this case. And this was not the only period. From time to time, even Akbar, much as Sulekul is very, very important, but we know that Chittor happened, and the same Akbar in the early period in the 1560s was very different from what he was in 1570s, and what our secular history would like us to believe in modern times. Jizya and very, very aggressive kind of Fatana and Chittor. And the fact is that Maharana Pratap is pitted against Akbar today in the same manner in which Shivaji is done with Aurangzeb. So, which would mean that we cannot, we have to recognize the complexities in the historical processes previously, as we know that there are complexities in our modern times also. So the politics of the time have to be understood in all its varied dimensions with whatever sources are available. And those sources are to be used judiciously, dispassionately, in a manner that will allow us to get a good picture, a picture of the kind judges arrived at, and therefore we might be in a position therefore to speak in a manner that could be acceptable as a scholarly endeavor in terms of understanding what happened in the past. So certainly Islam, Islam cannot be merely reduced to the one dimension of it. There are very varied dimensions, and different kinds of people have resorted to the uses of Islam. But yes, we have to accept what happened in particular context and the specificity of that context. And there are many different ways in which people would be operating.
Akil sir, now the next person whom I'm going to call has perhaps a different perspective to us. Obviously, he's a very good scientist, but at the same time, he's a Marxist also, and he's a socialist and social activist, Professor Ravi Sinha. Please.
Thank you, Razi Sahab. And thank you, Razi Akil Sahab, for a wonderful lecture. The question I have in mind is maybe a little bit different from the concern about the specific subject matter of your talk and your forthcoming book. I have a general concern, you can say a skepticism about the possibility of ideology-free history. And I am concerned about what kind of politics flows out of current theoretical tendencies and trends in academia. You have mentioned Foucault, you have mentioned Partha Chatterjee, you have mentioned many other names in that vein. And I wonder, whatever the critical theory has been in last 50, 60, 70 years in the quote unquote, in academy, one would say Foucauldian era, if you go into this microphysics of power and criticize power in general, in the abstract, when you unpack and dismantle the so-called grand narratives of nationalism, so to speak, so you have invested so much, academia and theory has invested so much into dismantling the grand narratives of liberalism, nationalism, and all that. And now we are in the midst of this proto-fascistic, semi-fascistic, majoritarian, identity-based politics ruling roost in India and in many other parts of the world. So what kind of politics flows out of this kind of critical theory and this kind of academic scholarship? Because, I mean, if you are in the political arena, you do politics by common sense and stand with liberalism to confront, or progressive politics to confront the right-wing majoritarianism. But the theory or the history that you do rigorously in your professional job is invested more into dismantling what many would call grand narratives of liberalism and nationalism, as Partha Chatterjee has done, or in case of liberalism, as Foucault, the original prophet himself did. I don't see that politics is, you cannot avoid, no matter what you say about politics or ideology, it cannot be avoided. You have to take a position in what goes on in the society and polity. And yet, most of theory, most of scholarship does not help you in taking a anti-authoritarian, anti-majoritarian, anti-fascist kind of theory. So my concern is about what kind of politics flows out of currently fashionable trends in theory.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. These are certainly important concerns. I'm thinking, when you were speaking, I was thinking about this book. I'm sure you've seen it, I Am the People by Partha Chatterjee, which is a collection of his recent lectures at Columbia University. I think it came out in 2020 only, where he's certainly concerned about the kind of strong leaders which have emerged to take care of majoritarian concerns regarding economic, deprivation, etc. And those strong leaders are not actually equipped to deliver, and then therefore all kinds of very, very aggressive, George Floyd and would mean that people would take to streets, which would mean basically that there will be difficulties on the streets, which is another problem. So you are right in terms of thinking about the need for some alternative narrative to or theory to counter these majoritarian kind of positions which have asserted themselves in large parts of the subcontinent, in Europe, America. We have seen it. I am agreeing with your concern, and I'm certainly not equipped at this stage of my knowledge about beyond a point. Giving examples from what I understood from, say, Rajiv Bhargav's work on political theory, that not so much Western political theory, but Indian historical experience over a long period of time, from Akbar, to going back to the Mauryan period, to Ashokan experience, and there are indigenous political theories. When someone like Rajiv Bhargav is talking about indigenous political theory from the Mauryan, etc., certainly he's not a rightist, in the crude sense today. So some attempt on the part of serious scholars are being made to actually make sense of how certainly what is happening today in terms of the Republic here, and generally what are the insights one can draw from historical experience. And for that, certainly one does not need to be necessarily a historian, a political scientist. Particharji is a political scientist, and Rajiv Bhargav is a political scientist. Or I refer to also Akhil Bilgrami's work, in terms of his work on liberalism and dogmatism in academia. Some 4 or 5 years back, he came up with those collections of very fine work, actually thinking about how do we handle these crises. So one way of doing it is to privileging the state and its power that should be above, everything, as Akhil Bilgrami would be saying. And same thing, Rajiv Bhargav would be mentioning that in a cultural society, when there are so much different kinds of political assertiveness in religious garbs, where then the state has to maintain equidistance from all the different kinds of interested religious parties to ensure that law and the state will remain maintain distance from the political and assert above all that. Otherwise, what are the ways in which we handle these diversities and how these diversities have come into being? Certainly, these diversities have come into being historically. When we go to 19th century, 18th, 17th, 16th century, so there is often this emphasis on Sulh-e-Kul, which we know is a problematic category. But certainly that was a concept that perhaps could have established the power of the state over other, claimants to power, whether it was Kashmir or Rajputana or Gujarat or Bengal, the way the Mughals, not every Saturday, but certainly the Mughals established their power, not so much on Dastarkhan, we'll come and have some biryani or kebab with us, but through very, very aggressive kind of political conquest, which lead to massive violence. But what were the governing principles? So akhlaq and adab kind of the kind Muzaffar has spoken to previously in his previous book, the languages of political Islam. So certainly, as historians and scholars, I have been thinking about these concerns, and everyone comes with her own perspective. So therefore, for me, I think that lecture that I was referring to, Governmentality lecture by Michel Foucault, is very, very important. Because already in the 16th, 17th century, European conquerors, emperors, have realized that there has to be a separation between religion and politics in the public domain. That religion can remain private, personal matter of the individual, but the state will not need religious legitimacy for its political action, and therefore there has to be a separation, and that would mean there will be a secularization of the public domain. That kind of secularization did not happen in non-European societies. That has not happened in India, we know. Even today, the state continuously need to intervene and pander to the whims of the religious sodality of one kind or the other. So that lecture by Michel Foucault, not necessarily inspired by Parthacharyaji's work, but I think that lecture is actually important in terms of thinking about how in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, we saw transformation in Europe in terms of separation of church and state, and that led to a very, very interesting kind of situation where certainly the state's power had increased, and the church remains important in the private domain and personal life of the. But does it mean that European model is is acceptable to us? There are difficulties. We know Europe is in a mess today. So we need to continuously think about certainly some insights from political theorists who are embedded in historical tradition in terms of their interpretation, etc. Insights from history, as I like to put it, is important. We can learn from the past to sort of not particular line, but particular sets of insights perhaps can help us develop something that can in terms of thinking, perhaps not so much intervention in public, but our own thinking is possible. So historical is important, perhaps.
Good. All right. So,
yeah, can I
yes,
jump
please
in here?
ask. Please ask a question.
Okay. I think it's a remarkable, really fascinating presentation. Also, I was struck by your optimism about the future. I think that is, I have a very similar my mindset. So as I hear you, it tells me that extremism on either end of the spectrum, or political or otherwise, it's not going to survive. I think it's a very short-lived, perhaps. Hopefully, it is the case in India in the current state of affairs. I think that's what you are. I'm really, for the first time, I'm hearing from somebody, historian, with an optimistic view of the future. Thank you for that.
So, Akhil sir,
yes, yeah.
Any
certainly,
brief comment
certainly
on that?
we have hope from our historical experience of what happened in the past, and things have to be brought to some degree of normality for us to live peacefully. I don't think beyond a point we need to worry. If there are things which are happening, which is on violations of law on the part of those in power, they are also being brought to book, and others also certainly has to follow. We have law and we have constitution, we have international communities, we have all kinds of checks and balances. So beyond a point, we don't need to worry, and we have to hope for the best. 3,500 years of history behind us.
So Akhil sir, I mean, what Dr. Abdul Jabbar just said or expressed, that probably he finds you as one of the rarest historian of present time who is so positive about what's going on, and he himself is of the same mindset. Though most of us really feel less optimistic, that doesn't mean that we are negative in our thinking, but whatever is happening or has happened so fast in India, it is mind-boggling. So my question to all three or any of you is, one thing that keeps haunting probably every sensible Indian, and I know the mindset of actually both sides reasonably well, because unfortunately or fortunately, I was put in a condition where I spent 5 years of my life, adult life, at Aligarh Muslim University, and exactly 5 years at Banaras Hindu University. This is one experience which I challenge very few people will have. And why these two? These two are the most symbolic, what you call the centers of these mindsets, where all kind of people are there, very extreme to one end, to other end, in between, at both places. So I have experienced that, and I watch it and I'm involved. What bothers me all the time is why it became so easy for the Hindutva forces to change the mindset or influence the mindset of so many Hindus who otherwise are not that much, I will say, violent in nature, or their culture or their old literature or their practices do not really provide them that kind of legacy. But they are proving on and on and on that anything they are as capable or more capable than anywhere else to change this society upside down. What is so easy? Why it becomes so easy? What is really in their mind, or what are those affairs or events that triggered them on, and so easy to go against the established ethos of India, or even their own, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, or Dharma Mita Siddhi, all kind of this thing where everybody is together and all is all one family. How this goes around? I mean, what is this psyche? How it is so effectively playing? This is a question that is really anybody is.
They have, because Hindus decided to become like Muslims. They have become Islamized. They want an Islamic state. Look at Malaysia.
Yeah,
Malaysia is 65%.
In America, we have become very bold to say what Indians usually still don't say. They feel shy. Here we have become so open to say, express it. So
Yeah,
they have become
in Malaysia, we have 65% Muslim population and they want an Islamic state. In India, you have 80% Hindus. Why not a Hindu state? Look at Muslims everywhere. The moment they are in like majority, they want Islamic state. Even Indian Muslims who want India to be secular, pluralistic, and democratic are so gaga about the Taliban. I can name some of the people who are part of the Indian Muslim coalition fighting for secular India are also fighting for Taliban without condemning their absence of secularity and their theological approaches to politics. We are
But it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense when you are 80%, you are already a Hindu state or a Muslim state, any percent of it. So what else you want to do?
It's like Sayyid Qutb saying, even if Egypt is 99% Muslim, it is not Islamic because Sharia is not imposed, right? Sharia is not imposed. So Hindutva wants to erase. They don't want to see, it's like they don't want to drive around India and see masjids. They don't want to hear azan. They don't want to hear Allahu Akbar, mashallah, subhanallah. Even listening to Zahir Khan give cricket commentary, he's becoming so de-Urduized and so strong Hindi, it's unbelievable. Listen to Arfa Khanam, it's like occasional Persian word, and then 20-30% Urdu, and then all Hindi. So this is what they want. They want to erase Islamic tradition, Islamic past, and that is what Hinduization is. They're not theological like Muslims. They are cultural. So it's a cultural Hinduization of India that they want. Temples, statues, all over the place. Like when you go to the Middle East, all new beautiful mosques. Great. They want all new beautiful temples. So that is what is happening.
No, my question was not what they want.
The other one, I think, did this 1992 Babri Masjid transform India in some ways that really reflect of what we are seeing today? I don't know. I'm just asking because I was not there. So because people.
The question I'm not asking is the consequence. The question I was not asking whether they want this or that. The question was totally different. The question was why, when it is not in their blood or culture or legacy, why do they find it so easy to get transformed on certain reasons? I mean, given them that, look, they did this and so you react, and they really can get reacted, though it is not in their legacy. So why it becomes so easy? That's the question, not consequence that they want this or that. That's the end point. How they're transforming, why Ravi Sinha is talking differently still. He's not in that mode. Or maybe Pandadhar or maybe somebody else. I mean, why there's still Yogendra Yadav pleading something different? Harshmandar doing something, or maybe millions and maybe still many 100 million, or a Rudrangshu sitting here. So they are there. So I cannot just say that, brush aside and everybody or a great majority. No, it's not a great majority. But whosoever does, why?
Yeah. Dr. Sandeep Pandey, when he was presenting his in a talk, I think he was very clear. He said something about 5% of Hindus are the ones, the extremists, harboring extremist views. We cannot, the Hindus or Muslims, they're not monolithic section of the society. So you have different layers of within the communities. I think when he was talking about Hindutva forces, there is very minor fraction of the whole total population. That I think that's what probably Dr. Razi
Okay, Jabbar Sahab. So to give this answer, a person who is sitting here very, very calmly or quietly, he is here and he would be able to answer. Tripathi ji, Professor Vipin Tripathi, आप मौजूद हैं? लगता सो गए लगा करके भी. But he is here and he is our. Yeah, I just wanted to hear from him. Professor Tripathi? No. So it's an open question. Anybody?
Sir, can I answer it?
Rudrangshu.
Yes, sir.
बहुत radical नहीं होना.
Yes, sir. Sir, the thing is that you are wrong in your assessment that we are not a violent society. I will give you a very classic example that if two vehicles collide by chance on the road, both of the drivers will come out and start exchanging blows. And both of them will tom-tom about their political clouts, their physical clouts, and I am so-and-so son, and I am so-and-so son, you do not know me. In a Western country, if two vehicles collide, the police will be called. Nobody will exchange blows. While I was in Canada, I was being told that here, if you slap anybody, you will get arrested first. That how dare you slapped so-and-so. We slap Mr. X or Mr. Y or Mr. Z so easily at a drop of a hat. We are only scared when we believe and we think who we are trying to slap is stronger than us and it will be retaliated with full vigor.
All right.
In exchange of one slap, we will be slapped 10 times.
Could I add a word here? Professor Razi, could I add a word here?
Oh, Sen Saab, okay. Hello, Sen Saab, okay.
Yeah, I think Mr. Rudrangshu Singh is right on the dot. You forget about history, which is not very clear to us, which is somewhat blurred. You think about the 47 partition. Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, all the three suffered immensely, and all the three perpetrated huge bestial violence. It's not too far back. So the whole claim and the whole premise that this is a land of peace, that's very questionable. So and so.
Thank you.
Razi Sahab.
जी रजी साहब मैं बोलूं?
जी त्रिपाठी जी प्लीज.
आई एम सॉरी मेरा कैमरा काम नहीं कर रहा है इसलिए मैं वैसे ही बोलता हूं. मुझे एक बात कहनी है. मैंने चूंकि अकील साहब की पूरी तकरीर नहीं सुनी और रवि सिन्हा साहब को देख के तो मुझे बेहद खुशी हुई क्योंकि उनको मुद्दत से मैं तलाश रहा था. वो नजर आ गए तो मुझे बड़ी खुशी हुई. लेकिन उनका मैं बात नहीं सुन पाया क्योंकि मेरे यहाँ साउंड बड़ी वीक आ रही है,
So
लेकिन मुझे एक बात कहनी है कि द एंटायर कम्युनलिज्म इन इंडिया is a creation of elite class, particularly the corporate class. उसका जो फाउंटेन हेड है वो हिंदुस्तान का बाजार है, इसलिए इसको फासिज्म भी हम कह सकते हैं और कैपिटलिज्म का मॉन्स्ट्रस फॉर्म भी कह सकते हैं। मैं समझता हूं कि हिंदुस्तान का जो मेजोरिटेरियनिज्म है वो एक हल्की चीज कही गई है। इट्स ए प्योर इंपीरियलिज्म, जो कि कॉर्पोरेट इंपीरियलिज्म का एक औजार है कि दबा के रखो, कुचल के रखो और ढांचा को तोड़ के रखो। मैं सोचता हूं कि ये जो अभी आप लोगों ने बीच में किसी साहब ने एक सवाल उठाया था कि जब साहब मलेशिया अगर इस्लामिक राष्ट्र बनना चाहता है, मिडिल ईस्ट के कुछ मुल्क इस्लामिक राष्ट्र बनना चाहे तो हिंदुस्तान हिंदू राष्ट्र क्यों नहीं बन सकता। ये जो बात है ये बड़ी वेग है, इस बात में एक कमजोरी है। कमजोरी ये है कि हिंदुस्तान हिंदू राष्ट्र नहीं बनना चाहता है। ये जो सारे के सारे बीजेपी आरएसएस के लोग हैं, हिंदू राष्ट्र बनाने में इनकी कोई दिलचस्पी नहीं। ये हिंदुस्तान को एक इंपीरियलिस्ट सोसाइटी जो 3000 साल से चली आ रही है उस ढर्रे पे लाना चाहते हैं, ताकि कुचल के रखो, लूट के रखो, दबा के रखो। आई थिंक वी आर फाइटिंग द बैटल नॉट ऑफ सेक्युलरिज्म, ऑफ ह्यूमन सर्वाइवल एंड ह्यूमन डिग्निटी एंड फ्रीडम। तो मैं सोचता हूं कि इसको इस एंगल से देखा जाए।
रजी साहब, कैन आई क्विकली ऐड वन थिंग? ये जो सवाल आपका है, अगर आप उसको फॉर्मली पूछे कि हाउ वर हिंदूज रेडिकलाइज और हाउ वर सम हिंदूज रेडिकलाइज, 5% कह लें, 10%, that is the key question. और ये radicalization hasn't happened over time. मतलब you can see कि assassination of Gandhi से पहले RSS का movement is for more than 100 years. But I want to share an experience. जब 9/11 हुआ था, I was at the center of the debates. I was at the Pentagon, and बाद वक्त उसी दिन I would come out of the DOD and then go for a Muslim seminar, closed door discussions of Muslim responses to 9/11 at IIIT, at CARE and other places. And one thing that I noticed was while the Pentagon and the State Department and others were deeply influenced by the trauma of 9/11, 9/11 ने क्या कर दिया, they were like, I could see people, I have met generals जिनकी आवाज कांपने लग जाती थी when they talk about 9/11. And then I would be listening to Muslim leaders who would be discussing politics and the reactions, everything as if 9/11 did not happen. A, and B, would not factor in the trauma of Americans in their response. So I have a feeling कि ये जो awareness RSS वगैरह ने बताया है कि वो मुसलमानों ने ये जुल्म किया, Muslims have oppressed us, they have conquered us, they have repeatedly robbed this temple, that temple. In fact, when I was very young, I had a Hindu girlfriend and we had a fight and she said, "Arey rehne do Khan, baat niklegi to Somnath tak jayegi." And this was about which movie to go, you know. So I was quite stunned. कि भाई which movie to go could lead to a discussion about the raiding Somnath temple. So I think that yes, steady radicalization of diet plus by the facts of terrorist activities coming from across the border, Mumbai ke, see, we don't talk about what impact the Mumbai terrorism had on the Hindu psyche, the attack on the Indian parliament, the wars that have happened, 65, 48, wagara. So I think Muslims have to listen very carefully to the Hindus who have been radicalized if they want to be able to have a serious dialogue. But if we exclude the trauma that they experience, real or imaginary, that doesn't matter, the impact is going to be real, then we won't be able to de-radicalize them.
Yes, no doubt.
So thank you very much. I think Dr. Azizuddin Sahab, we can conclude now with your
बहुत लेट हो गए, बहुत लेट हो गए जी, आप लोग बहुत लेट हो गए. And usually, you know, it goes for 90 minutes, so it हो गया, आप लोगों के लिए बहुत देर है. तो thank you very much. और फिर मिलेंगे इंशाल्लाह, और आप लोगों का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद, शुक्रिया. And perhaps we have learned something new, perhaps certain new ideas always come through all these such lectures. And now we got exposed to new scholars also. And चलिए फिर मिलते हैं, and we will be engaging with you guys again, and keep joining us with different topics. Our topics are very real variations of different kind, and your Jamia colleague is coming next week. He is always like every month once. He is the only one who has made a base here, like, Dastan Goi storytelling, or a old poet from Progressive Front, and all those things we keep on doing. Thank you very much, and we will see again.
Thank you.
Sardar Sahab, Ravi Sahab, Jabbar Sahab, Apil Sahab. Hello. All right, Rudrangshu. Thank you,
night,
Madhu
sir.
Sahab. Leave. All right.